Very warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening to What Next for Bengali Archives. My name is Halima and I'm the Heritage Officer for Learning Participation at the Tower Hamlets Local History Library and Archives. And we have been putting on this series of events for Bangladesh 50 Years, which is a project as part of a larger project called Citizen UK, which is a partnership project with the National Portrait Gallery funded by the National Heritage Lottery Fund. So our program of online events has been exploring the connections between the 1971 War of Independence and the local community here in the East End. For those of you who are completely new to us, Tower Hamlets Local History Library and Archives is a repository of materials relating to the East End, to Tower Hamlets. You can find out lots more about our collections. You just need to go into ideastore.co.uk/local history. You'll find our online catalogue and our full programme and everything else we get up to, basically. So please do visit our website for more information. I also want to just make a quick announcement or apology for the confusion around the Eventbrite emails. I think it's at various times. We've had a few technical issues. For anyone who joined us yesterday, you would have noticed tech has not been our friend for the last 2 days. Thank you very much for your patience and your understanding. As you know, this is sort of the way of the world at the moment. So we continue. Welcome back to some of you who joined us yesterday as well, and thank you all for joining us. I will start off by introducing our speakers. So we have 3 speakers with us today. I will introduce each speaker in turn, and they will give us sort of a 10-15 minute presentation relating to the question for this evening. And then what we will do is open it up to questions. Sinjida and I might ask a few questions just to kick things off. You might want to post questions into the chat box as we go, and we'll pick all of these up at the end. And then you might have more to ask later on, which is all very welcome. So without further ado, I will go on to introducing our first speaker. I'll just check. So our first speaker for the evening is Ansar Ahmed, who's a community activist who has lived and worked in the East End of London since the 1980s. He has worked as a youth, social and community worker and has been an active anti-racist campaigner. He's also completing his PhD at Queen Mary. He works with us a lot at Tower Hamlets Local History Library and Archives. He's always depositing stuff with us, which we're very grateful of. I could go on. And I've known him for some years now, and we've worked on various projects together. So very warm welcome to Ansar, and I invite him to share his screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Halima. Right. Okay. We can all see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Hello. I'm just going to really give you an overview of some of the collections that we have kind of come across in our research at the Swadhinata Trust. So it's no way a mapping exercise or a comprehensive research into the sort of collections within Tower Hamlets or beyond Tower Hamlets. And I guess in terms of our collection, it really started with a project that we did in the year 2006. It was an oral history project where we looked at 3 different themes, and for each theme we had interviewed about 15 people for each of those themes. So the first theme that we looked at was 1971, which I guess is fairly relevant in the fact that we are celebrating 50th anniversary of Bangladesh this year. And this event itself is part of a series of events of celebration. So in 71 in the UK, when the war broke out in Bangladesh, the Bengali diaspora, I would say for the first time, organized politically into demos, protests, and they held huge demos in Trafalgar Square and towns and cities across the UK. So we interviewed, I think, just over 15 people who were involved in those demos, including people from Tower Hamlets who had taken part in some of those events. And Tower Hamlets itself, including the Bangladesh Welfare Association in Fournier Street, was a hub of community activism in support of 71. The second theme that we addressed was community activism that took place during the 1970s and 80s. And this is an image taken by Paul Trevor on the 14th of May, 1978. This demo took place 2 weeks following the killing of Altabali. And this image is a rally in Hyde Park. And if you look at the kind of the front of the image, most of the people here are actually from Tower Hamlets. And the placards that they are carrying were made by Dan Jones, who have attended, I think, the previous events at Tower Hamlets. And I would say, perhaps, for the Bengali community, I think this was perhaps the sort of golden moment of community activism during the 80s. For the third theme, we looked at the third generation young people who were involved in the creative industry, mainly traditional and modern music. So we interviewed a number of young people who were attached to the Asian underground music scene, the Asian Dub Foundation, Joy, Usmani Sounds, State of Bengal. So this gentleman is a practitioner of traditional folk music known as baul music within the Bengali community. And he is holding an instrument called Aktara, which literally means one string. He's no longer with us, but he used to live on Woodsear Street, just off Bricklaying. And on Friday and on Saturday, he used to have jamming sessions in his home. And this image was taken by us in his home at the time. So these are the kind of three themes that we had covered. And because at the time we didn't have permanent premises, or well, we still don't have permanent premises or specialist equipment, what we did was all the audio recordings were deposited at British Library Sound Archive, and all the transcriptions from the interviews went to Bishopsgate Institute and all the materials that we had collected. So yeah, I think all in all, there were 21 interviews. I'm sure there were more, but anyway, so that's where they're all kept at the moment. And I should also mention Tower Hamlets Local History Library and Archives. It's somebody that we work all the time. And in 2004, we did a project in partnership with them where we conducted 10 oral history interviews and a publication that came out of it called Bengali East End. And there was also an event titled Bengali History Month in March. I should point out we also worked, and we still do work with other community groups and institutions, both within Tower Hamlets and outside. And I'm just going to briefly mention some of them. So in, I think it was in 2011, we worked with a small community just across Tower Bridge in not far from Elephant and Castle, opposite the Pink Elephant Shopping Centre. I think we have Julia with us today, Julia Honnes, who led the project. She would probably tell us more about the project itself. But from what I can remember, it's probably deposited in Southwark Local History Library and Archives. And it looked at the settlement of Bengali community in Elephant and Castle, more or less the same time as Tower Hamlets community. We also worked with London School of Economics in, when was it, in 2009, which kind of looked at post-1940s, post-partition, 1947 migration, you know, people that came from India and people that went over to India, as well as people coming to Europe, to the UK to settle down. And I'm sure the archives are kept at LSC for that project. I should also mention the East Side Community Heritage, which is one of the largest, I would say, community archive and has a very large collection. In fact, when we were homeless, at one point we were housed with the East Side Community Heritage in Stratford Town Hall. I don't know, for a few weeks. I mean, Julie was actually based there. I mean, they have tons of material, and the two that I can think of in relation to Bengali communities, Bengali Tales, which is an intergenerational storytelling project based at Manor Park School. And the other one is Our Bricklaying, which looks at the Somali and the Bengali community of Bricklaying. Just going back a bit, I'm only mentioning this because this is in Tower Hamlets and Whitechapel Art Gallery. They also have their own archive. This poster is from 1979, where they had a month-long exhibition of Bengal. And I'm sure they probably have the stuff in their archive. The next slide is about Bengali Lashkars, who were the first Bengali settlers that came to the UK. And images can be found at Docklands Museum, Greenwich Imperial War, and other, including the British Library. This image, I'm not too sure who this belongs to, as in many cases, but it does show a group of Bengali seamen. And there's a young man in his lungi standing up, which brings us to our current project that we're working with Four Corners. It's titled Bricklaying 1970 at the Turning Point. And we are currently, as I said, working with this project. All the images were taken by Paul Trevor, and currently we're trying to identify people in the images and then conduct oral history interviews. So this project will also generate further archival photos and oral history interviews. And just to say some of the other archival materials that we are aware of is, so Ethne Nightingale, who's just finished her PhD at Queen Mary, has been talking to young migrants, or who came as children, and has collected lots of stories and memorabilia and images. Toy and Behold, based in Wentworth Street, also has their own archive, and currently they are also celebrating Bangladesh's 50th anniversary, working with us in developing storytelling and a musical tour, which will take place, I think, sometime in June or July. Outside Tower Hamlets, I can think of Westminster, where a youth group recently, not recently, but they have also presented their findings to Tower Hamlets Romena Toki led those two projects where they looked at women contribution in 71 from the UK. We also worked with a Muslim Women Welfare Association in Ilford, where they looked at South Asian women who had brought objects over from their country of origin and how those objects relate to their current, their reflection and their reflection of the time. Julie worked with Indian suffragettes, I think a couple of years ago. She can tell you more about that. I'm not going to talk about London Metropolitan Archives because we have Howard here who's going to present fairly soon. But I should point out that they do have the entire GLC collection. And many of you may know that GLC had funded many of the Bengali community groups in Tower Hamlets. So they do hold annual reports and other literature belonging to Bengali community groups that the GLC funded at the time. I want to finish with this image as we are celebrating 50th anniversary of Bangladesh. There are lots of images of demos that took place here in the UK. The obvious place is Getty, and then there's the weekly Bengali newspaper called Janamot. They also have lots of images from 71. And then there is Roger Guen from Birmingham, who took lots of pictures both in London and in Birmingham. Yusuf Chaudhry was another Birmingham-based photographer who took pictures as well. He has passed away, but I think there's an album that exists of his photographs from 71. Autograph did an exhibition in 2008 of images, not from here, but from Bangladesh itself. And following the exhibition, they did all the images to Bangladesh High Commission in Kensington. So if you ever go up there, and if you go up the stairs, you'll see them. I think there are about 70 odd images. Abu Lays Shemol is somebody we are currently working with. He is from Bangladesh, and his pictures are all from Bangladesh during the war. We are currently working to produce an album by the end of this year. But from what I know, none of his photograph has been archived anywhere. So the offer is there, anybody wishing to archive his photographs, you may want to contact myself or Julie at the end of this event. I'm going to end here. There is a 3-minute video of some of the people that we interviewed for our own project. I don't know whether it's whether Halima or Sanjida, you're able to show that. Can you show that? Okay.
Yes, I can try. If you could stop sharing your screen, and then I can.
Oh, okay. All right. So yeah, I'll end here, and we will see the film. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Bear with me.
Was the plan to build a church. It was the second Christian church in East London. But for a very long time, there was only one. And then they built a second one in the 14th century. And they carried the bricks from an old Roman cemetery called Lulsworth Field. It now is, more or less. And they carried the bricks down to what is now Whitechapel Road. And so the highway through which they carried the bricks became known as Bricklaying. And because the church was built of white brick, the local people called it the White Chapel, which then gave its name to the area and eventually to the main road.
I don't know if anyone else is having technical difficulties.
Yeah, it's kind of frozen, I think.
Yeah, what we might have to do,
Is it
is pop the video into the chat box, I'm afraid.
Okay. Yeah, it's fine.
Thank you very much. And if you could watch it at your own leisure. I think Sanjeeta's going to do that now.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Ansar, for your presentation. I think that was a really lovely overview and context for what we're going to discuss today and the various sort of collections, certainly some that I've never come across. So thank you very much for that. We're going to move on to our second presentation for the evening. And Ansar's already mentioned Howard, who has joined us from the London Metropolitan Archives. And he'll be looking at sort of Bengali archives, informal repositories and local authority collecting. Just as an introduction to Howard Doble, Howard is a senior archivist at the London Metropolitan Archives, and he is interested in promoting sources for the study of Bengali history. We were very pleased to see his presentation many months ago now, and found it incredibly sort of insightful and fascinating as staff members. So it's really lovely to see another local authority collection, which we could sort of look into when we're exploring Bengali history. So Howard will be speaking for about 15 minutes, and then we will move on to our next speaker. Can I invite Howard to share his screen, please?
Thanks, Halima. I will do that. Just to say, I'm going to turn my camera off when I present because I've got internet issues, I'm afraid, today. But here goes to share my screen.
Thank you.
Can you see that?
Yeah, that looks perfect. Thank you, Howard.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you very much to Halima for organising this event and for inviting me to join you this evening. My primary aim really is to share with you some fragments of Bengali and Bangladeshi history as preserved in the records we hold at London Metropolitan Archives. I've some images of documents to show you. It can only be a snapshot, but hopefully I may inspire some of you to come and carry out your own research with us. So let me say a little bit about LMA to start with. We're the largest single record office for London's history. We hold almost 1,000 years of records, including documents, photographs, maps, prints, audio collections and films. And we've over 105 kilometres of shelving and literally millions upon millions of records. And we like to say, if you're interested about any aspect of London's history, then you'll find information with us. And we are a fantastic resource. But there's a danger in complacency with that statement. And this is one of the themes I'm sure we'll touch on later, that archives can exclude as much as they can illuminate. In preparing for this talk, I came to the following conclusion. The history of Bengal and Bengalis is everywhere if you care to look, and nowhere if we don't. And by this, I mean two things. On the one hand, histories of Bengal and Bengalis are embedded in British history. Put another way, they are British history. The development of London cannot be understood without reference to Bengal and colonialism. Bengal is in the bricks and mortar of London's buildings, at the heart of many of its institutions, its commodities and cultures, and of course, notably its populations. But the problem here is you'd be forgiven for not realizing any of this. These connections and narratives are often missing from mainstream histories most of us come into contact with. The school textbooks, the popular histories, the programs we see on TV, and indeed, dare I say it, the catalogues of many public archival institutions, LMA included. So there's a collective failure to challenge narratives of British history, which are products of colonialism, which are largely Eurocentric, which are centered uncritically on whiteness, and particularly elite male, able-bodied straight whiteness. They're empire light, and they privilege particular aspects of the past. So the first thing I want to say is this, that change requires a wholesale reimagining of Britishness and British history to promote ideas of an interconnected, multi-layered, shared history. And I must say I'm in good company this evening with Ansar and Julie, because that's exactly the work that they've been doing to make sure that British Bengali history is being placed centre stage. And once we start looking, the rewards are actually there. So the Bengali presence in London is centuries old. Bengalis are to be found in parish registers, some of the earliest sources we have which list Londoners. And here we have an entry in a register of baptism for St. Luke's Church, Chelsea. It tells us that John East, described as a native of Bengal, was baptized on the 10th of January 1777. And this is by no means the earliest such entry. A man called Peter, born in the Bay of Bengal, is baptized in the City of London in 1616, the same year that Shakespeare died. And we're rediscovering so many of these entries at LMA as part of our Switching the Lens project, which is a volunteer-led project to find references to Londoners of African, Caribbean, and Asian heritage in parish registers. And we're digitizing the entries and adding them to the searchable database on our website, and I urge you to take a look. The entries often raise questions. As we can see here, the names are anglicized. It's rare for original names to be listed, and this poses questions of visibility in other sources. So if we saw John East listed elsewhere, would we guess his Bengali heritage? And places of origin are also not always precisely given. What does native from Bengal actually mean? There are ambiguities there. And most importantly, these entries invariably lack voice. We often know nothing about these individuals beyond their names in the register. They're intriguing fragments of the diversity of London's population. Certainly they allow us to begin to imagine rich histories if we choose to do so. But the challenge remains to find the stories behind these names. But sometimes this is possible. In 1765, a John Morgan appears as a prosecutor in a case before judges at the Old Bailey. And Morgan accuses John Ryan of stealing from him. And here is the case as recorded in the Sessions book. There's an immediate clue to the connection with the subcontinent. One of the stolen items is a silver rupee. But we know more about this case because it was reported by the press and published in the Old Bailey Sessions papers. John Morgan was a Muslim, originally called Abdullah. Interestingly, the case is adjourned so the court officials can find a Quran for him to swear upon before he gives evidence. His witness statements for the trial give Abdullah a voice. It tells us that he was born in Bengal and had come to London twice before on East India Company ships. He had arrived in 1764 to look after a tiger for St. George Pigott, governor of Madras. And you can read more on the Old Bailey online website. Now, amazingly, he's possibly one of the two men depicted here in this painting by George Stubbs, who was commissioned by George Pigott to paint the animal in question, though you'll see the tiger is actually a cheetah. The painting is in Manchester Art Gallery, and it's exciting possibly to put a face to Abdullah. Now, Abdullah is described in the court registers as a Lascar, and Ansar has been talking about Lascars, but this is not actually correct. As he appears to have been a servant to George Pigott, which shows that individuals can be described inaccurately by officials and records. But many Bengalis arriving in London from the 18th century onwards were Lascars, sailors working on board East India Company ships. And here we have a document which lists Lascars from the ship Aurora in 1824. It's from the papers of a firm of solicitors dealing with the estate of the ship's owner after his death. From the bill of sale, we know that the ship was built in Chittagong, then East Bengal. And the list shows here records the board and lodgings costs for Lascars while the ship was in the harbour. On the left, we have one such lodging establishment, which was a stranger's home in Stepney. Now, there's no further information about these men, but Lascars are sometimes given voice once again via court papers. So, for example, in 1874, a case was heard at the Old Bailey against Horatio Walters, who was accused of killing 3 Lascars, Fujia Ali, Sheikh Abdullah, and Kalu. Witness statements of various crew members give accounts of the brutality and abuse they served on the voyage. The verdict is evidence of racism. Walters is found guilty only of manslaughter. Jury show mercy, and I quote, considering the very difficult position in which he found himself with so utterly inefficient a crew and many of his acts of violence being committed under provocation. So he's sentenced to 15 years in prison rather than death. Here we jump to another list, some 150 years later, and electoral registers are amazing sources for tracking changing populations for a given area over the years. On the left, we have the electoral roll showing Bricklaying in 1976. The names listed are overwhelmingly Bengali. And for a visual record of a changing landscape, our photographs are a very, very rich resource. Many can be viewed online on our London Picture Archive website, and they can be an amazing record of street life. Here on the right, we have an early shot of Old Montague Street in 1961. By 1970, many Bengalis were living on this street. And here we have some more examples, again concentrating on Tower Hamlets, but our holdings cover the whole of Greater London and will capture Bengali life outside of E1. We see many continuities with earlier East End migrant communities, so Bengalis are praying in old synagogues, making clothes in Huguenot weavers' houses, and adapting businesses to meet social and cultural needs. So London is very much a city of migration. But it's not just the long Bengali presence which can be traced in the archives, important though this is. There are also rich episodes of Bengali and Bangladeshi history to be uncovered if we look closely enough. So here we have a photo of the inside of a house in Buxton Street in Spitalfields. It's from a file of the Greater London Council who wished to purchase the building to redevelop the area. It becomes Allen Gardens. Now the story of the house is fascinating itself, and I'll come back to it. But here I want to actually concentrate on the date of the photo, and the date is January 1972, and the poster of Sheikh Mujib that you can see. Now the file tells us that the GLC has been trying to contact the owners throughout 1971, but they have temporarily returned to East Pakistan. For me, this simple photo evokes the Liberation War, the support of Bengalis in London for Sheikh Mujib, the agony of being far away from the turmoil, perhaps returning to be with family or help the war effort. And given the date, January 1972, perhaps we can imagine the room's occupants celebrating Sheikh Mujib's release from imprisonment in West Pakistan and his surprise appearance in London on the 8th of January 1972. It's all supposition on my part, I know, but sometimes history requires imagination. This slide leaves less to the imagination. On the left, we have the Pakistan High Commission in Lowndes Square, Belgravia. Following the news of massacres of civilians by the Pakistan Army in Dhaka on the night of 25th of March 1971, Bangladeshis in London held a series of demonstrations at the embassy on the 26th. A number of protesters were arrested by the police and taken to court on a variety of charges. All were prosecuted. Here we have a page from Marlborough Street Magistrates Court dated 27th of March 1971. Now, London became an important centre for support for the war. In fact, opposition to the West Pakistan regime had been developing in London for many years prior to 1971, and many key groups and organisations were established by East Bengalis and shaped by politics in Pakistan. Restaurants were often centres for political debate and activism. The Ganges restaurant shown on the left in Gerrard Street, Chinatown, was the site of many political meetings, as was the Mughal Shahi restaurant in Wardour Street, Soho, which is shown top right, where inaugural meetings of the UK branch of the Awami League were held in 1970. At bottom right, we see the newly named Bangladesh restaurant in Dorset Street, Westminster. According to an announcement in the local newspaper, the Marylebone Mercury, its name was changed from Sherry Punjab on the 13th of August 1971 in support of the cause of independence. And the spirit of resistance did not end in 1971. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Bangladeshis united time and again to fight against racism. Here on the left, we see the Naz Cinema in Brick Lane, an important cultural venue for Bangladeshis in the 1970s. On the 12th of June 1976, the Anti-Racist Committee of Asians in East London held a mass meeting here, followed by a protest march to Leman Street Police Station demanding action to keep blood off the streets. And on the right, we have an image of the demonstration on Brick Lane in 1978, following the racist murder of Al-Tabali. This photo is a favourite of mine. One day when I was looking at it, a familiar face popped out, my cousin-in-law Jamal Hassan. I'd never noticed him before, which goes to show the more you look at what you think you know, the more you find. An important battlefield proved to be housing, and here Bengalis mounted a direct challenge to the authorities and pioneered some particularly radical forms of protest. The Bengali Housing Action Group was founded on the 6th of February 1976 as a mass squatting movement to resist racist council housing allocation policy. In the mid-1970s, squatters were making homes in housing left empty by overambitious council slum clearance programs. At the high point of the campaign, in the summer of 1976, some 50 families squatted Pelham Building, a 19th century tenement block on Woodsear Street, which the GLC wished to clear and redevelop. BAG was able to use strength in numbers to negotiate rehousing in the local area. Now, the colour photograph here is a recent discovery for me. It's a powerful image and shows we're finding things all the time. We don't have a date or a location for the photo. Perhaps someone can identify it today. I wonder if it might be Nelson Street. The graffiti is partially painted out, but I think it's calling out the racism of the council. It's an indication of the powerful presence BAG exerted. And the GLC archive is potentially a very, very rich source for exploring council policies with respect to housing of Bengalis and provides evidence of structural racism. And BAG was only one of a number of groups which campaigned to improve the conditions for local Bangladeshis. Here we have documents relating to the East End Community School, which was set up in 1977 by Anwara Begum and Muhammad Nurul Haq to provide schooling in Bengali language and culture, which mainstream education was failing to provide. The school was first located in the basement of Brunswick Buildings, shown here on the left, a property which, despite being condemned years before, was home to many Bengali families who could not find alternative accommodation through the council and were forced to live in appalling conditions. For those interested in the development of education policy in London from 1965 onwards, the archives of the Inner London Education Authority are a fabulous resource. The murder of Al-Tabali in 1978 was a turning point in the development of a number of Bangladeshi-led community activist groups, mainly set up by younger generations to expose racism and fight it in all its forms. Many of these groups went on to play a major part in local politics thereafter. They held the GLC and borough councils to account, applying pressure when necessary and campaigning on a variety of issues. Here we see examples of some reports submitted to the GLC under various grant bids for the funding in 1980s. Reading through them, we encounter not only the experiences of racism and the concerted resistance at the grassroots level, but also the busy cultural scene. And so I hope I've shown how the archive collections at LMA have potential to construct the lives of some of London's Bengali residents through the centuries. We certainly need to build on this to promote these histories and make them easier to find on our catalogues. I think it's true to say that if you don't expect to find something, don't bother to look. But there is a danger that all this gives the impression that if you look hard enough, you will find relevant sources in archives of institutions. I've already spoken about the fact that the records often don't give voice to the people they record. We also need to consider the wider exclusions and omissions from the official record as well. There is a strong tradition of keeping archives in Britain. We're taught that archives are grounded in objectivity, neutrality, and authenticity, and that it is this which ultimately gives value to records, the neat, codified, ordered sources of historical truth. It's an appealing thought, but archive collections can also be constructed as a means of controlling the historical narrative, something which requires us to explore ideas of subjectivity, concealment, exclusion, and importantly, power in archives. Research I undertook a few years ago into the epidemic of racial violence which Bangladeshis of Spitalfields suffered in the 1970s produced very little documentary evidence of this racism in the archives of the Greater London Council, despite the fact that many of these acts of violence were happening on GLC-run council estates. The gulf between the grassroots reporting and the official line was astounding. If, as became clear to me, the GLC's official response to racism in the 1970s was silence and denial, where does that leave historians trying to reconstruct these events using these archives? So as I hand over to Julie, it seems to me that community archiving is an important means of bridging the gap between official histories and the grassroots experience. The immutability of the official archive is both a strength and a weakness. Certainly there is the expectation that history will be preserved, but without interventions, there is always the danger that public archives will simply uphold existing narratives, and that in time, the longevity of the official archive will outlive the relative fragility of other experiences. History is messy and complex. Archives are merely fragments of histories, and the more fragments we have, the better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Howard. What a beautiful presentation and very poetically put as well. I'm sure we'll be getting lots of responses to that later on. And you've already alluded to our next speaker, Julie Begum. I'll just give you a little mini intro and then Julie will kick off her statement, I guess. She won't be presenting, but has plenty to say. So Julie Begum is co-founder of the Shogunator Trust, one of the first organizations specializing in promoting Bengali culture and history amongst young people. I should also mention Julie is also massive supporter of the archives and has been supporting our work for many, many years. Certainly, we've done several projects over the years. Most recently, she's deposited the Women Unite Against Racism collection with us, which was central to our last sort of exhibition, Unite and Resist. So we're very grateful for the work Julie does and the partnership she brings and the collaboration she brings to the table. So welcome, Julie, and I will hand it over to you. I think you might need to unmute yourself. Hang on, let me see if I could do it.
Okay, is that okay? Can you hear me?
Yep, thank you.
Great. So thank you very much, Halima, and the Tower Hamlets Local History Library and Archive for organising this event, Shanjida for the technical support, Ansar and Howard for your presentations. It's really great to hear what you have to say. I'm very conscious that I invited Julia Honnes to this event, and I just wanted to ask her to say a few words if she would like to, because I know she needs to leave by 7. So if we can do that before I start, because Ansar said that we worked in partnership with her earlier. So just a bit about the inspiration of the work that we did with you, Julia, if you don't mind.
Julia, feel free to unmute yourself and speak.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so lovely to see you and to hear everything that people have to say. So yeah, I'll be brief because I'm not giving a presentation, but 10 years ago now, I worked with a group of young people on the Rockingham estate at the Elephant and Castle. And we were doing various projects, and to cut a very long story short, I think it was becoming clear that for whatever reason, people were feeling disconnected, young people were feeling disconnected from not only the area that they were living in and kind of knew nothing about it or how their families had come to be there, but there was also an assumption from people that they also knew about where their families were from, and that was also not the case. So sort of roll forward a bit into an unsuccessful and then a successful Heritage Lottery application, and we started the project 10 years ago with employing one of the young people to work on the project. So just looking back through some of the images today, I realized that the project is actually archive material in itself already. Yes. And I think that's what we forget. We're often looking at things that have happened a much longer time ago, but looking, I'm still in touch with a lot of the young people from that project, and they're grown up, they've got married, or they've become record producers, or sadly gone to prison, or whatever, and I think all those people are there, looking back at them, it's such a long time ago, and there is archive material there about how young people got together with support to record the histories of their families and their communities. Already, like so it was quite textbook Heritage Lottery application, as was then, you have your visits to the archive, you have X number of oral history interviews. It became clear sort of really early on that we had to make that interesting to young people, because the formulaic way of doing it is not, people aren't going to buy into that. So I think the project was truly sort of co-designed by the young people. But we did come out with interviews, 12 interviews that went into the archives, an exhibition, a booklet. If anyone wants the booklet, I still have some. But it's important, isn't it? Because you're when you're handing things over to archives, there's a huge relief that someone else has some of the you know, the important people, if you like, have where it's not going to get thrown away, or when somebody comes to clear out an office, you know that it will be preserved. So that the information is in the archive is in the Southwark Local History Library and Archive, but I always keep a few back for myself just in case, and obviously that's distributed amongst the community. So if anyone would like one, I'll leave my there's a nice booklet that goes with it. But yeah, I'm sort of rushing through. Is there anything I've missed? And of course we worked with Shogunator Trust, and it was, you know, and we're sort of still in touch in one way or another. So
yes,
yeah, is that okay? Was there anything else you wanted me to say?
No, that's thank you. Please leave your details in the chat, and then people can contact you if they need or want the booklet that went with the project that you did.
Yeah, and thanks so much for inviting me.
And thank you for speaking about it. This relationship that we had with Julia and the project in South London sort of exemplifies the kind of work that we really are interested in doing. So just a bit of information about the Swadhinata Trust. Some of you know about it, some of you don't. So I'll just give you a bit of an overview and some background about why we're here and what we're doing and what we hope to achieve. So the Shogunator Trust is an East London based volunteer-led secular Bengali community group, and we've been working promoting Bengali history and heritage amongst young people, and the project that Julia talked about is a good example of how that happened. So we've been around since the 4th of November 2000 officially, and so we've been doing things like seminars, workshops, exhibitions, educational writing educational material for young Bengalis, young people as well, in schools, colleges, youth clubs and community centres in the UK. And it's really important that we do this because we want to promote the Bengali history and culture to ensure that its representation is an essential part of the history of Britain. Like Howard was saying, it's a part of our story and our relationship with Britain, and it's really important that we show this and relate it to the contemporary world, really. And like Julia said, the need for the trust arose because there is an absence of documentation and social data representing Bengalis and our heritage, our historical presence and achievements internationally. And this does contribute towards a sense of marginalisation, low self-esteem and alienation amongst young people in particular. So to counter that, we want to make sure that there's this, this information available for younger people to relate to, who are really a minority ethnic community in Britain. And so we want to counter and sort of challenge the kinds of limited participation and contributions that Bengalis are perceived to have having in mainstream culture. So one of our goals really is to get to a wider audience and to be able to share this information. And we did a feasibility study led by Daniel Lamarche in the year 2000 when we launched ourselves, because we want to establish a centre which its main activity will be a field of research and education and culture. And we want to do this in a way that is operated as a community for non-profit and sort of sharing our educational material, teaching resources and providing consultancy services to statutory, voluntary community sector in Tower Hamlets, but also beyond. Ansar talked about the Tales of Three Generations Bengalis in Britain that we put together, we worked on, and we did this with an organisation, a university in Surrey, and partnerships are really key to the way we work. We wouldn't be able to do any of the things we do without partnership, because as volunteers it's very difficult for us to be able to, we don't have the resources or the capacity. So working together, we have produced this oral history, social cultural heritage project. And this really was, I think, the first time that oral history had been collected of Bengali people in Britain. Before that, a friend of ours, Caroline Adams, did her own research. She was a friend of lots of Bengali people in Britain. She herself volunteered in the refugee camps in India when Bangladesh was at war with Pakistan. And when she came to work in Tower Hamlets, she worked as a youth and community worker. And through her work, she met lots of Bengali people, Siletis in particular, and she wrote her book based on the interviews she did with Sileti, mostly men. And in a way, that sort of inspired us to make sure that we did this for ourselves, really. And so the Swadhinata Trust has been really was born out of that inspiration. And also I was personally motivated to do this because I remember as a young person not really having anywhere to find out about my history or culture or heritage. I mean, there was nothing in the UK British education system. Like Howard said, it was quite invisible, and our parents were too busy surviving to have time to talk to us about any of the traumatic experiences they were going through or dealing with in the UK to sort of provide anything about our own cultural heritage. So there was this huge vacuum, really, and so the trust was the first, I would say, to fill that vacuum. And since then there's been this huge response from different groups all over the countries, as well as Tower Hamlets, to research our own history. And I think creating these projects, working on these projects, has been really something that's been fundamental to our work. The kind of projects that we have been working on, and just to sort of mention a few, Ansar's mentioned some already, but we're also very contemporary. You know, we've been working with King's College London on social learning about COVID and vulnerability and social distancing in the Bangladeshi community. And we've been looking particularly at the experiences of older Bangladeshi people and how they have been experiencing the coronavirus. And so documenting their experiences and their carers' experiences has been really vital for the kind of research that's been done on the pandemic. Other projects that we've been working on, Ansar mentioned that we interviewed some musicians and cultural activists. We're currently working on a Bengali music and musicians project with the British Library Sound Archive to document Bengali cultural history through music, and it's not just the sort of the I would say that just the positive experiences of Bangladeshis as well. We're also working with the LSC on how people are being attacked for their views and writing. So we've been working on researching how secular humanist bloggers and activists and publishers, university lecturers and members of the minority ethnic community and foreign nationals have been systematically targeted by religious extremists in Bangladesh and also in Britain, and highlighting that experience as well. I mean, so we do a lot of different things, and it's quite difficult, I suppose, to sort of say that there's one vision or one focus. What we try and do is find things that we feel passionate about and that we want to know about ourselves, and we try and find partnerships with organizations that are interested in doing the same with us. What else do I want to say? So yes, and we're not exclusive, but we won't work with extremists. So we work with anyone except extremists, and we try and work in a way that makes things relevant and meaningful for the people that are interested in it. One of the things that Ansar and I try and do is to lead these history and trails into our hamlets, which we produced with the council. There's this cultural walk that we do through Bangla Town and the Bengali East End, and we try and highlight through this walking tour the presence of Bengali people in the area that are not visible anymore, but some are, you know, in Bricklaying, but there's also invisible sort of I suppose in names there are some, and like Howard was talking about, in some of the archives of the churches and places that are nearby. So yes, it's a bit of a messy talk that I've given, but what I wanted to do was to give you an idea of the kind of things that we've done, but the kind of things that we want to do is to make sure that we are reaching younger people really, and talking to them about their history and their culture and their heritage in a way that's still interesting and meaningful and relevant to them. And being a part of this Bangladesh 50 project with the local history library and archive has really been able to help us focus on our work and be able to share it with lots of others. And I'd like to thank I'd like to thank you for inviting us to be a part of this amazing project. And I think you know, we've got more delights in store that they're going to be announced later on next month. So I'm looking forward to this relationship continuing and working with you, the people who are attending this meeting, at this event, in other ways as well. So thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, certainly Ansar and Julie and many others have helped us shape this program, the project, and even the art installation, which you will be hearing announcements about hopefully in the coming weeks. We're just finalizing details for that. Before we move on from Julie, actually, one thing I was just going to ask you is, you know, the reason why we invited 3 speakers and the way we've sort of had Ansar give us an overview and Howard talk about, I guess, how repositories collect Bengali, British Bengali history. What's interesting about Swadhinata Trust is, I guess, people come to you because you have more of a culturally specific methodology. You understand the community, so your collecting with you is very different from collecting with the Tower Hamlets Local History Library and Archives or with the LMA, for example. So can you say anything about that, about, you know, what's the benefit of working with the Swadhinata Trust, and can you give us a little bit about the process, and then I'll ask you a few more questions and then I promise we'll open it to the floor.
Of course, yes. So what we do is we rely on our networks, the relationships we have with people. The reason people choose to work with us is because we have these very developed relationships with people. We engage with people in places, in spaces, in languages that they're uncomfortable with. We've been doing this work for a long time, so they know that we're not just here for the moment or for the project. It's something that we're really dedicated with. So we have we have a reputation of working like this. Our sort of reason for working like this is to make sure that the people that we are interviewing or highlighting, their voices are at the center of the work that we're doing. And so it's not really about us sort of having an agenda about it. It's about making sure that the voices or the stories that haven't been heard are given that platform. So that's why we work like this, and that's really our methodology. And we start from where we're at. And so we're not academic. I'm not an academic, and I'm not really interested in being one, but it's really important to engage with academics to make sure that the work that we're doing gets the kind of recognition and value that it deserves in terms of the kind of work that's already out there. So that's why, you know, it's important to work with all sorts of people, but it's very important for us to make sure that we work in a way that makes people feel comfortable about engaging with this kind of heritage kind of project, because it's quite alienating for someone who doesn't really engage with the heritage sector to be asked about being a part of a project or to be interviewed. So it's really important to make sure that they have ownership of that project really as much as possible, and making it into something that's really meaningful and relevant to them.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add that in so that we can move on to our first sort of batch of questions. Please do post your questions into a chat box. We're going to get to them very soon, in just a few minutes. And I will kick off with sort of one question that we wanted to start off with, Sanjida and I. And this is to all the speakers, Ansar, Howard and Julie. When you're working with various community groups, Bengali community groups, do you always feel like these groups recognize the value of their collections or their archives or even their stories? You know, and if they don't, how do you get around that?
For me, it's a process. It happens as it develops. I don't think people are fully conscious of the value of their own stories until they start telling them and listening to other people telling their stories. It's something that happens as it develops, and I think it's encouraging people to feel confident enough to tell their stories. And listening to others is the way we try and work.
Yeah, I would agree with Julie. I mean, you know, we're not really experts or academics, but I think because we are rooted within community, we have the local knowledge and the local context. Hence, people tend to trust us. And I guess that's how, you know, we are able to collect stories from local people. Also, we have a wide network, our Hamlets, which I forgot to mention. I mean, you know, we have worked with projects outside London, like in Birmingham, Luton. There is a project going on in Bradford as we speak. And I think somebody mentioned in the chat box about communities in Scotland, Wales and Ireland. I should point out that I went to Ireland just before the lockdown, to Belfast, and to my surprise, there's a big Bengali community there. So, you know, if anybody wants to carry out projects in other parts, do contact us. We can give you the context for Bengali community. But yeah, I guess because our advantage is the fact that we are from the community and we have access to the community.
Howard, would you like to add anything?
I mean, in many respects, probably it's not a question I can really answer. I mean, I think that the thing is that LMA hasn't really done a great deal of work engaging with particularly with Bangladeshi community groups. I mean, obviously the work that I've been doing is very much on the collections that we hold at LMA and trying to make that Bengali history more visible, and hope that people will use it and that it can be taken to schools and so forth and appear in, you know, the exhibitions that we do and so forth. But I mean, we'd love to have conversation. I mean, we're here to have these conversations. You know, we want to speak to you know, Bengali groups, London-wide Bengali groups. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, LMA is a London-wide archive. You know, we have borough archives in London for, you know, specific for localities. So Tower Hamlets obviously have amazing collections. I mean, we're always here to speak to groups, to promote, you know, Bengali history. And the hope is that, you know, that we can help and that we can share expertise. I mean, there's not a sense that we're out there to capture archives from groups. I mean, we're very much wanting to share expertise, to help people. We're all in the same game here. We're wanting to preserve history and make it accessible, and that's kind of where we're coming from. We want to do what we can to enable that.
Thank you. We might quickly look to our chat box, and Sanjida, are there any questions, or I can ask another question?
I mean, I had a question myself, if that's okay. I just wanted to thank as well Swadhinata Trust. I think for a lot of us British Bangladeshis who start doing research, our first point, well, certainly my first point has always been Swadhinata Trust. So that the amount of research that you've done and you make accessible to everybody, even as individuals, you're so approachable. You know, I'd like to thank you for that. And it was you, Swadhinata Trust has always been my starting point, and then sort of I'd go to the larger institutions. So in relation to that, I guess when we were advertising this event, some questions were posed about language relating to the predominance of Sylheti speakers, especially within the British diaspora. How do we collect to reflect that linguistic diversity? Are these issues that you've both come across when you're collecting sort of from the local community? It'd be great if you could expand a little bit on that.
Well, we collect in the language that people want to talk in and speak in, and that's the starting point. And also, we don't assume that it's just going to be Bengali, Sylheti, English. It's also Italian or whatever language that people are comfortable speaking. There's thousands of Bengali Italian speaking people here in Tower Hamlets, and they've been coming here for years. And so we need to be really aware of the fact that it's a changing landscape. We can't assume that it's just going to be Bangla or English. There's going to be lots of other dialects, also a mixture of English and Bengali together. Younger people are also creating languages all the time, new cultures. So we really need to be present to the kind of diversity that we have in our communities, and not just think of it as a homogeneous group of people that migrated at a particular time and that's it. No, it's a changing world, and we need to be able to reflect that in the kind of work that we're collecting, but also in the archives that are also collecting those experiences. Ansar, sorry, you were going to say something.
I forgot. Sorry. What was the language issue? Yeah, I mean it's same really. I mean the interviews that we conducted, most of the young people spoke in English. Some of the elders spoke in Bengali, which we had it then translated. Yeah, so everything that we've done has been translated into English, but the audio recordings some of them are in Bengali and available at the British Library.
And within Bengali, there are lots of different dialects and different ways of expressing language. So we don't assume that there's only one way to express that language.
No, thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to mention, just because Julie mentioned Caroline Adams earlier, that we do hold the papers for Caroline Adams, including tapes. Remember those?
Cassettes.
Yeah, I remember them. And we're very pleased, and we'll be announcing soon. We're working with Nadia Valman at Queen Mary and we've been successful in securing an HRC grant to possibly digitize those tapes. Again, those interviews would have been in Sylheti. He's sort of done a rough transcription. So and that's mostly what we have access to, because we wouldn't be able to make the cassette tapes accessible. So there are aspects of this this linguistic diversity that are recorded, and even then they're not quite accessible yet. But we're hoping to make that accessible in the coming years. Are there any questions yet from the audience? Otherwise, I have another one.
There are lots of comments. I mean, there was a discussion around sort of sharing archival material on public platforms, so we can sort of have access to a wider audience. How do you overcome that? Because as archives, we obviously have copyright issues for a lot of the more recent images as well as sort of data protection issues. So it'd be interesting to hear how perhaps the conflicts and the resolutions for that.
I mean, I think copyright is a perennial problem. I'm afraid it's something we do come up against. I mean, in terms of actually accessing images, I think people in the chat were kind of wondering how they could get access to images. I mean, we have a designated image website called the London Picture Archive. If you Google that, and there's tons of images on that, and you can search them by address. And you can make your own kind of research copies that you can kind of take away with you. If you do want to use material on that, depending on obviously there are copyright issues, we would ask that you contact us, but depending on the use, that if it's on social media and so forth, it's possible that we can allow that use if we hold the copyright. But I think it is a shame we can't, we're not free to use the images as necessarily as we like. People do have rights in those images, and it's something that archives have to deal with all the time. And we'd love to be digitizing lots and lots of our stuff, but because we want to give access, we want people to access it easily, but it's not something we can ignore, unfortunately.
Thank you. I mean, the other thing I would just want to add to that is, I know copyright sounds scary, and it could be sometimes, but also it could be pretty straightforward. I think we were discussing this yesterday when we did the Whose Image Is It Anyway event. So for example, we have the personal papers of Ansar Ahmed, Ullah, and it'll be a matter of, contacting him, and I'm sure he'll be very generous, in letting you use them. So sometimes it is quite a simple thing of just asking the copyright holder if we don't hold the copyright, and sometimes they're very understanding about it, especially regards to sort of PhD research and so on. Most of the time I feel people are using for educational usage and generally promotional usage. If there's any other comments from the chat box we want to pick up?
A question from Mash Joy. Has Shogunator Trust consulted with young people in schools with regards to what they want to see to preserve their histories?
Well, as volunteers, we have a limited capacity to do that. So what we try and do is work with schools and organisations on projects as and when requested. And we have worked on various projects with different schools, producing actually new material in response to some of the historical events that have happened, for example, around Doble and his murder. So, and looking at social justice and how that has impacted on the community and what kind of resistance people have had from the community, and then getting the young people to think about their own lives and how they are challenging or dealing with issues that are relating to their lives and the things that they care about. So it's trying to, within our limited capacity, we work with young people, but it's very dependent on working in partnership because of the lack of resources and capacity.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Mash.
We have another question from Gardi Ahmed. What is the funding landscape like for academic or community projects looking to investigate these archives and build back these histories?
Go ahead, Ansar.
It's a tough one. I mean, we're always struggling to secure funding.
I'm crying most of the time after each rejection.
So it's, I mean, we don't really have any revenue funding as such, but we tend to go from project to project. If I can recall, I think a couple of our last projects were funded by Heritage Lottery Fund. They are strong on, community heritage involving young people. But yeah, no, I think it's constant struggle for community groups to survive and to secure funding.
It's a particular talent. I mean, Carla from Four Corners that we've been working with on the 1978 Bricklaying project, and also the new Bengali photo archive, has been excellent in putting these funding bids together and being able to acquire the support from the Heritage Lottery Fund. But and the Tales of the Three Generations of Bengalis in Britain was also funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund. But it's still, you know, it's challenging still, I would say. And it's, yeah, something that we've never really been able to do very well.
Hence, we tend to go for partnership work.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly say that I mean, resourcing is clearly the big challenge here. I mean, we're very fortunate at LMA that, you know, LMA is willing to fund work as core work, so that, you know, me doing this today, that, you know, researching and so forth, you know, it's great that I can do that. I would say about kind of, you know, the funding bids. I mean, LMA is always happy to, you know, help out in that, get involved, work as partners on projects. So I mean, if there are ideas about kind of, you know, projects to promote sort of Bengali history, and they're kind of, you know, you think it's appropriate, do get in contact with us, because it's possible that we could help out in just kind of providing advice and support for that. But I think it is a major challenge, and it's why this is such a problem. You know, this idea of trying to make Bengali history mainstream history is that there are problems if it's so difficult to resource this. You know, it already becomes specialist history if you have to find funding for it, if it's not core work, and I think that's a major problem.
Thank you, Howard. I'd like to share a comment from our archive manager, Richard Wiltshire, who's on here. He was saying he's concerned how current small organizations and businesses are doing in the pandemic. Are there any Bengali organizations closing where a lot of heritage might be lost when they close? Perhaps places like LMA, Tower Hamlets, Bishopsgate, and so on can signpost advice on what to do to safeguard this.
Well, yes. I mean, organisations have been closing for years. I can name one at least, like the Jagannarí Women's Centre that was opposite the East London Mosque. That was a flourishing centre set up by, run for Bangladeshi Bengali women, that was, you know, completely run into the ground because there was lack of support and funding. And there's always been a need for organisations like that. We're still struggling to find premises for our own sort of work in Tower Hamlets. It's very difficult when you're competing in London for finite resources, and it's something that will always be at risk, because the small organisations and businesses will go out of business, really, and it's only because we've been doing it for the love of it that we've survived so far, I think, you know, and trying to encourage people to work with us as well whenever possible. That otherwise I felt like giving up many times, because it is a struggle, and sometimes you wonder why you're doing it, because there isn't much value given to this, to be honest. But in recent years, I have been very heartened by the kind of interest and support that we've been getting from not only the Bengali community, but wider mainstream community to support this kind of work. So it's, you know, I think we're having a good time at the moment because there is such interest, and younger people are interested, which is fantastic. You know, they're producing amazing ways of working, and it's not just in London, it's happening all over the country, and people are producing incredible work. So I'm very hopeful that yes, things will disappear, but then other things will be created as well.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. We might start to draw the evening to a close now if there's no more burning questions for our speakers. And thank you, Richard, by the way, for your question and comment. If there's nothing else, I might ask Sanjida just to pop the evaluation form into the chat box. As you know, your feedback means a lot to us. We've been receiving really lovely feedback for the BD50 program so far. Please let us know what works, what doesn't, what you'd like more of. One of the things we're doing as part of the legacy work for Bangladesh 50 years is having a dedicated Bengali history club, which is still in the sort of in development stages because we just couldn't fit everything in. So long may these discussions continue. Long may we have interesting speakers like we have this evening, and we will be announcing that hopefully later this year. So if you can, please do fill out the evaluation form. It takes literally a minute and a half. Otherwise, I want to thank our speakers. Thank you so much for your time and your energy and your expertise this evening. Thank you very much for everyone in the audience, for your comments and your questions. And we will see you very soon. You can see the full program for Bangladesh 50 years on our website. Our next event is on the 29th of May. We will be joined by Tam Hussain, who will be talking about Ayub Ali Master, who was his great. So there's still some spaces if you'd like to join that. Otherwise, have a wonderful evening and see you very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Julie, Ansar, and Howard, I will share the chat with you. There are lots of lovely comments in there, lots of thank yous. So we'll send that on to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for everyone for being here tonight.
Yes.